Hi, if you want to watch exclusive content with hot girls that you won't watch on YouTube, namely where Naruto roasts Kushina and Mikoto and many other hot girls without restrictions, then visit my Boosty channel at the link in the description. Night, a great time to think, no one distracts you and thoughts flow in the right direction. A young guy was sitting in the lotus position with his eyes closed on a large stone near a small pond in the yard of his house and was thinking about something. "Anai-san, why aren't you sleeping?" Another young guy decided not to sleep on this beautiful night. He approached his older brother and sat down on the same stone, with his back to Anai-san. In response to his younger brother, the guy exhaled heavily and opened his onyx eyes and looked at the starry sky. "Madara, if something is bothering you, you can tell me. I am your brother." The younger one was worried about his Anai-san, because he had been very thoughtful all week and almost never talked to his Ototo. "You know, isn't it, you're right." Madara thought for a moment and continued speaking. "I've been having the same dream for a whole week and—" "What kind of dream is that?" The guy turned sharply towards his brother, interrupting his story. "Izuna, if you want me to tell you everything, then don't interrupt me," the shinobi said tiredly. The younger brother scratched his head guiltily and continued to listen attentively to his brother. Madara, in order to calm down, ran his hand over his face and closed his eyes, better imagining his dream. "In this dream, there is white space. It all begins with me looking around and finding a silhouette far away from me. I run towards it. When I am already approaching the goal, I realize that it is a young girl. I cannot see her face. She walks forward and I can only see her back. She is wearing a beautiful white kimono with long sleeves that cover her arms, and her hair is long, silver in color, like silk. It probably feels that way, but I can never touch her. It is as if she is slipping away from me. I walk behind her for a while, then we stop, and she puts her long hair over one shoulder. On her kimono is depicted a fan of our clan. At this point the dream ends. The young man gets up from the stone and looks at his only surviving younger brother. Who do you think she is? Izuna stands up after her brother, and they walk back home side by side. I don't know, Izuna. We don't have such a girl in our clan and never have. I looked through the entire archive. Izuna stops abruptly and turns his entire body to his older brother. And if she is your future wife? Madara's Ototo said with a slight squint and a conspiratorial smile. The answer was not long in coming. The brother gave his younger brother a juicy slap on the back of the head. Don't talk nonsense. This can't be a prophetic dream. The guy walked on. Although in his thoughts he thought exactly that, and it made him even more nervous. Scratching the bruised place, Izuna moved after his brother. Why not? I think it's quite possible. The strange thing is that she's not from the Uchiha. Then what clan is she from? The guy thought and didn't hear his brother's answer. That's what worries me. The next morning, a young girl stands holding the arm of a middle-aged woman. Their long silver hair reaches almost to their feet, and shimmers in the light that filters through the open shoji behind them. Mom, are you sure you can convince them all? The girl looks at her mother. In response, the woman smiles at her daughter. Of course, dear. She leans slightly towards the ear of her only daughter. The main thing is to persuade your father. And winking at her daughter, she confidently walks into the room where the clan meeting is currently taking place. The girl exhales heavily. The main thing is to believe in your mother. The beautiful Haim simply could not understand her father's motives. How could he give his only and beloved daughter in marriage to some old man? The girl could understand that her father probably wanted his clan to have military support, but the clan he was planning to sign a marriage contract with was not strong. Then why give his daughter to such a worthless clan like Sakai? Did he really want to get rid of his daughter? Lost in her thoughts, the girl did not notice how the voices behind the shoji she was standing in front of became more animated. Hitomi, please come into us. Mom looked out at the girl and smiled sweetly at her. Entering the room intended for holding meetings, the girl bowed and sat down on a pillow in front of everyone gathered, as if she were a guilty kitten. Her eyes were lowered down, so the girl did not see the gazes of those gathered, but she felt them perfectly. Hitomi, do you know why I want to marry you to the head of the Sakai clan? The father asks a question. There are no strong emotions in it. It is just a question to start a conversation with his daughter. No, father. The girl looked at the head of the clan, but did not raise her head. I want you to be safe and not to suffer in any way from the ongoing war. I don't want you to see battles and killings, because you are not a shinobi, you are a Haim of the Senju clan." Having heard her father's words, the girl clenched her fists, lying on her knees, a beautiful kimono. She does not agree with her father's opinion. She can stand up for herself precisely because she is a Haim of the Senju clan, and she is not weak. "But-sama, wouldn't it be easier to negotiate peace with our enemies?" the wife of the head of the Senju clan said carefully, sitting next to him. "Nariko, we've already discussed this," the clan leader said harshly, as if cutting off. "How can you not understand? I can no longer watch my children die one after another." The woman could not stand it, and with furious eyes in which tears were accumulating, Nariko shouted, "I can no longer watch you and I bury our own children." The woman's tears flowed in streams down her beautiful, porcelain-like face. "I am dying with them. No loving husband can watch the tears of his beloved woman. What do you suggest I do?" Although But-sama loves his wife, he is rarely gentle, so it is not surprising that even at such a moment, he shouted at his wife. Everyone who remained watched the squabble of the married couple. The clan council was shocked, because no one expected such a violent reaction from the spouses. "A contract with the Uchihas," the woman said confidently, shocking everyone present. "A marriage contract with the Uchihas," the woman added and looked at her daughter with a gentle gaze. Hitomi's eyes almost fell out of their sockets, as did everyone else's. This was not the scenario she had imagined when she spoke to her mother about canceling the marriage contract with the Sakai clan. The woman did not want her only daughter to suffer. On the contrary, she wanted everything to be good for her daughter, for her to be happy. Chapter 2 For several days, the head of the Senju clan pondered his wife's words. At first, he thought she had gone mad at the meeting, but later that evening, when they were alone, the woman explained her decision to him. At first, But-sama did not want to think about it, but every time his thoughts returned to this proposal. After thinking for a long time, the man finally came to the most difficult decision in his life. Sitting on a pillow with his legs crossed, taking a deep breath, the man began to write a message to his most sworn enemy, Taijima Uchiha, about a marriage contract as a truce. The man felt how light female hands fell on his tense shoulders. Having felt the support of his wife, he is now absolutely sure of the correctness of his decision. At the same time, the children of But-sama and Nariko Senju were near the river. Tobarama sat on a boulder and threw stones into the water. Hashirama and Hitomi stood not far from their brother and looked at the surface of the river. "Hitomi, are you absolutely sure?" Hashirama was the first to start this difficult conversation. "Absolutely, Anai-san." The girl looked at her older brother, and Hashirama saw a slight smile on her face. "Okay." He smiled back and ruffled his little sister's hair. "I believe you and will support any decision you make." "Hitomi, are you normal or not?" Tobarama appeared next to his sister in a flash and grabbed her fragile shoulders with his palms and shook her well. Usually a cold and calculating shinobi, but when it came to his sister, it became difficult to hold back his emotions. "You're definitely crazy if you just agreed to this stupid agreement." The brothers had completely different opinions on this matter. "Tobarama, I really agree. If it will stop the war, then I don't mind." The girl gave the same smile as Hashirama. "Idiot." Tobarama snorted and turned away from his sister. "Follow me." The guy confidently stepped onto the surface of the river. "Where to?" Hitomi was surprised, but followed her twin. "Let's practice. I need to be sure that you will fight off the red-eyed demons if we are not around." Hashirama was already sitting on the cobblestone that had been occupied by his younger brother some time ago. He began to watch the twins' fights with curiosity. Initially, they had the same element, but completely different techniques. Hitomi was never taught shinobi skills, but she always watched her brothers from behind, but no matter how much she tried, she could not make seals. The brothers, noticing their sister's suffering, decided that they would train her themselves so that she could stand up for herself if necessary. Hitomi would be a very strong kunoichi if she were allowed to fight and taught to control her strength. She has enormous strength, but the girl never learned to fully control her strength, which creates some problems. The next moment, huge water dragons soared into the sky, if Tobarama only needed a few seals, then Hitomi controls her dragons with her hands. The brothers watch the light, smooth movements of the younger sister's hands. At the same time, she manages to dodge her brother's attacks with grace that is only inherent to her. She looks like a goddess. Runs through the brothers every time they watch their sister during the fight. Suddenly the battle stops abruptly and Tobarama appears next to Hitomi and covers her with his body. Hashirama jumps up from the rock with lightning speed and looks tensely into the thick forest on the opposite bank of the river. Uchiha! The silver-haired guy hissed angrily. Hitomi tried to look at the newcomer with interest. Suddenly this was her future betrothed, if they agreed to their father's agreement, but her brother blocked the view with his broad back every time. Having abandoned the pointless attempts to peek, Hitomi took a step back and her hands created a water barrier, thereby covering their family with a water wall several meters high. Let's go, we don't need any trouble before the conclusion of the agreement. Tobarama wanted to be indignant, but he understood perfectly well how this could end, so taking his sister by the hand, the three of them disappeared into the forest and were already rushing towards the clan. As soon as Hitomi was far from the river, the wall crashed into the river like a huge wave. The impact of the water caused a large amount of splashes, which shimmered in the sun like crystals, blinding the eyes with bright colors. The young guy watching this spectacle blinked in surprise, because he was already ready to fight his sworn enemy, but he ran away. This is not like Senju at all. And the question remains, who was Tobarama hiding behind him? Why did this young Uchiha end up in the place where the Senju were? Izuna, feeling the release of a large amount of unknown chakra, decided to go to this place. When he approached, he saw water dragons fighting each other. At first, the young Uchiha was only interested, and then, noticing the Senju, he intended to attack unexpectedly. But Tobarama's sensor noticed him. Stopping, Izuna saw how the ash-haired man was hiding some girl from him. The only thing he noticed was long hair the same color as Tobarama, and then a huge water wall appeared in front of him. This somewhat puzzled Izuna, because he did not notice how someone used the technique. And when the wall disappeared, there was no one on the other side of the river. Returning back to the clan, one thought came to Izuna's head. What if this girl from Anai-san's dream Chapter 3 House of the Uchiha clan head. There are two people in the room, an adult man and a young guy. The man looks at the scroll in front of him. He does not open it because he does not know what is in it. It could contain anything from an explosive seal to some dangerous technology. Father, I think we should open it after all. The young man was already tired of watching his father hesitate to open the damn scroll. The man nodded to his thoughts and opened the ill-fated message. As it turned out, there was nothing terrible inside, just a letter. The further the clan leader read the text, the more his eyebrows knitted together. Damn Senju! He's completely out of his mind. Having finished reading the scroll, the man threw it on the table. Taijima rubbed his forehead with his fingers to relieve the tension, but it wasn't a very effective method. What is it? The young man approached his father, bent down, and took the scroll in his hands. Having read it to the end, his eyebrows came together on the bridge of his nose just like the head of the family. What are we going to do? I want to ask you this. He clearly points to my eldest son there. Therefore, I leave it to you to make the decision yourself, as the future head of the clan. This will be your first serious decision, on which the future of the Uchiha will depend. The man folded his hands into a lock and rested his chin on them. Yes, father. Madara turned around and left the room. Before telling his father the answer, he wanted to consult with his only brother. The same stone that was there last night. Only now it is daytime and the bright sun is shining, not the night Princess Luna. The stone is an involuntary witness to the heartfelt conversations of the strongest shinobi of the Uchiha clan. And what did you decide? Izuna turned to his brother and waited for his answer. The decision Madara made could change their lives forever or change nothing. I don't want to lose you, Izuna. I'd rather sacrifice my happiness than you. Madara placed his hand on his brother's shoulder. He was sure that if he agreed to this step, Izuna wouldn't die like their other brothers. But it's Senju. Madara, wake up. The younger one threw the hand off his shoulder. How do you imagine, two clans that have been feuding for many years, suddenly decided to stop the war. Do you think everyone will agree with this right away? Izuna did not want to accept the fact that he could possibly become related to Senju. It was unthinkable. No, not right away, but I think the generation that will grow up before our eyes now, without seeing war, will be able to live more harmoniously. To do this, we need to do everything so that they live in peace. Izuna crossed his arms over his chest. If you agree that the future generation will grow up in peace, then you must accept and support my decision. Let's end here. Having dotted the I, Madara got up from the cobblestone and went to tell his father the decision. Are you sure you can live with Senju under the same roof? And what about the mysterious stranger from the dream? Izuna looks at the back of his brother as he leaves, skeptically raising one dark-haired eyebrow. I'll deal with her myself, these are my problems. About sleep. A short pause, the man thought about whether to tell his brother or not. I don't dream about him anymore. And the long-haired guy disappeared from the sight of the younger Uchiha. Izuna, of course, will support his brother's decision, and somewhere in his subconscious he understands that it will be better for everyone, but he is not ready to let a girl from Senju into his family, into his home. He is not ready yet, but it is a matter of time. That same evening, the house of the head of the Senju clan. The bathroom is filled with steam from the hot water. A young Haim lies in the bathtub, relaxing with her eyes closed. She is not thinking about anything, peacefully lies and saturates her body with moisture, after soap procedures. Hitomi, can I come in? The girl turns her head towards the area in front of the bathroom, where the silhouette of a stately woman is visible. Of course, Mom. Hitomi rises and, already sitting, looks at her mother. Did something happen? The girl leans against the edge of the bathtub and rests her chin on her hands. The woman approaches the girl and kneels near the bathtub, looking affectionately at her only daughter. Nothing, it's just that tomorrow my daughter is getting married. Nariko strokes her daughter's head and runs her hand through the entire length of her hair. Hitomi turned her back to her mother, and a single tear rolled down her cheek. Since childhood, the girl imagined that she would marry for love, but life slightly set her up, presented her with a marriage contract. Hitomi, listen to me. As the wife of the future head of the clan, you must not allow a war between the clans to start again. I think you exaggerate my capabilities. He probably hates me and won't even want to look at me. Don't be silly. Even if you marry by agreement, a man's attraction to a woman occurs on a physiological level, and in this regard, girls can manipulate men very well. Nariko began to braid Hitomi's hair, smiling playfully with her crimson eyes. Do you think I can interest him? There was a note of disbelief in the voice, followed by a sarcastic laugh from the young Haim. Hitomi, you are a beauty and don't doubt yourself. There was a short pause. Hitomi closed her eyes, enjoying the fact that her mother was braiding her hair, like she did when she was a child. Mom, did you marry for love? This question had been tormenting the girl for many years. The mother's hand stopped for a second, and then finished braiding the girl's hair and threw it over her right shoulder. Hitomi turned back to her mother and looked straight into her eyes. Yes. I loved your father as soon as I saw him. He is stern, fair, but at the same time very sensitive, which is what I love about him. A dreamy smile lit up the woman's face, but seeing how sad her daughter's look became, she decided to tell the story of their family. But my mother, your grandmother Azumi, also married under a marriage contract to establish allied relations between her clan and the Senju clan. They were not always friendly, but my parents loved me very much. I did not feel that my parents did not marry out of love. They respected each other, and over time they could not imagine life without each other. And what do you mean by that? Hitomi looked at her mother with interest, waiting for an answer. I want to say that if you marry by agreement, most likely your children will be happy and still loved by you, even if they are not from your loved one. Children? The girl asked incredulously. Yes, you will have children anyway, it is written in the contract. Nariko already regretted that she had started talking about children, because no one had warned her daughter about it. The contract states that you must become pregnant within a year. This will be a guarantee of peaceful cooperation between the clans. Hitomi exhaled heavily. I understand you, Mom, thank you for telling me everything. The girl stood up to her full height, naked, drops of water rolled down her fit and slender body, smoothly outlining the curves of her body. Pale skin shimmered in the light of the lit candles, shimmering with a warm glow. "We need to go rest and gain strength for tomorrow." Hitomi couldn't sleep a wink that night. She kept thinking about her upcoming marriage, imagining her future husband. She doesn't know what he's like, because the girl has never seen the Uchiha in person. She's only heard what her clanmates said, and those weren't very flattering words. The Senju clan Haim imagined her life in another clan, and her main tormenting thought was about having children together. Chapter 4 The head of the Senju clan, along with his family and a few close shinobi, stands near the gate that marks the beginning of the Uchiha clan. They are met by Izuna, the groom's younger brother, and led to the home of the head of the Uchiha. "Only Mr. Butsuma's family will enter the house," Izuna said with an unreadable face and crossed his arms over his chest. Butsuma nodded to his shinobi, and the entire family of the head entered the house. Entering the meeting room, Hitomi came face to face with her future husband. This was their first meeting, where both met face to face. The heads of the clans greeted each other and shook hands. Everyone else bowed in greeting. There was tension between the families, but it was not critical. Having sat down on the tatami, the adults began to discuss the terms of the contract. Not only the parents, but also the young people took part in the conversation. Hitomi alone sat and looked at her hands first, and a few minutes later at her fiancé. He was tall, with aristocratic white skin, piercing black eyes that caught her glances without Hitomi noticing, and with rather long dark hair that shimmered with blue. He was certainly a handsome young man. Hitomi completely agreed with that. Having finished looking at Madara, the girl looked down at her palms, resting on her knees, and began to fidget with her fingers. Madara noticed with a glance that Hitomi was no longer looking at him, and her saddened eyes, directed at her palms, indicated that the girl was upset about something. Without knowing why, the guy's fists involuntarily clenched. He shook his head slightly and again immersed himself in the essence of the conversation. "Madara, maybe you should give Hitomi a tour of the house? The girl is completely bored with our uninteresting conversations." Madara's father looked at his son. "What are you saying, Taijima-sama? I'm not bored at all, on the contrary, I feel comfortable here with all of you. And I'll have time to admire the house later. So, if you don't mind, I'd like to stay here." Hitomi smiled sweetly at the man and slightly inclined her head in a bow. He, responding with a condescending nod, returned to the conversation with the girl's father. Madara and Hitomi met each other's eyes and looked at each other for a few seconds. But then Hitomi looked away, embarrassed. Even though it was an arranged marriage, she couldn't help but admit that she liked Madara. She was not at all used to men's glances, because in the Senju clan she almost never left the house. Her father worried about his daughter and protected her like the apple of his eye. And when Madara's onyx eyes looked at the girl for a long time and piercingly, she became embarrassed. Her cheeks flushed with a slight blush, making Hitomi even more beautiful. Several people noticed this change in her face: Nariko, the girl's mother, Izuna, Madara's younger brother, and Hitomi's older brothers, and each drew certain conclusions for themselves. But the main thought in everyone's mind was, maybe something will come of this. Two young people are standing on the river bank. A light breeze plays with their long hair, slightly moving it. Both have their eyes directed to the opposite bank of the river. This is where they first met, and very often afterwards, in secret from everyone, they saw each other here. "How do you like my little sister?" Hashirama turned to face his sworn friend. "Isn't she really a cutie?" The guy folded his hands into fists and shook them cutely in front of his face. It looked comical. A respectable young man, but he uses cute girlish gestures. His interlocutor rolled his eyes and crossed his arms over his chest. "Well, seriously, Madara, how do you like my Namoto?" Hashirama winked his right eye and poked his elbow into his friend's side, who hissed from the unpleasant sensation and glared at his friend menacingly. She doesn't irritate me." He rubbed the top of his head unlike some and glanced sideways at Hashirama with a sly, mocking look. And both guys laughed. "But seriously, just try to offend her, Madara." The threatening ki began to slightly surround Hashirama. "I won't care that you are my best." Hashirama was not allowed to finish by a cry from the thick of the forest. The next moment, chakra tentacles burst out of this very forest, as if alive. Chakra, out of control, raged, and it looked very frightening. Hashirama jumped up and rushed to help his sister. Madara did not lose his head and moved after his friend. When they arrived at the source of the sound, they saw that Hitomi was sitting by the tree trunk, huddled and curled up. Apparently, some techniques were used on the girl that harmed her psychologically and physically, and the body resisted and tried to protect itself, so the chakra was so chaotically curling around the girl, not letting anyone near. Some men were standing around her and trying to get to her bypassing the tentacles. Noticing the silhouettes that flashed by, Hitomi raised her head. Her eyes were red and wet with tears. Just this morning the girl was fresh and beautiful, but now she was unrecognizable. I'm going to Hitomi, and you go. Hashirama didn't have time to tell the plan of action, and Hitomi's fiancé was already destroying the strangers who decided to encroach on his territory. Madara couldn't control himself when he saw Hitomi in such a state. Something inside him was screaming at that moment. I'll destroy everyone! The next moment, his eyes transformed into Sharingan, and he rushed at the enemy shinobi. There was no one left alive. When Madara had dealt with everyone, he went towards his fiancée and best friend. Hashirama holds Hitomi's face with both palms and tries to reach her, but the girl has not calmed down and her chakra is still raging. What's wrong with her? Madara towered over them, his shadow covering them. It happened several times in childhood. There were several attempts on Hitomi's life at an early age. Each time it ended in a state where she could not control her power. But usually it passed quickly. There was alarm in Hashirama's voice. Assassination attempts? Madara raised an eyebrow questioningly and squatted down. He tilted his head to the side and thoughtfully began to examine the girl. What is it about her that attempts were made on her? Because of her chakra. One day, we noticed how the Amuto was playing with water near the pond. She was just waving her arms and moving her fingers, and the water followed her. Enemy clans want to get Hitomi's power. Most likely, now it's not just about kidnapping a child and raising him as their own, but getting an heir from the Amuto. A deep hollow appeared between his eyebrows. Hashirama frowned deeply, then exhaled heavily, sat in the lotus position and waited for his sister to end her hysteria. Hitomi doesn't know how to fold a seal for techniques. She does everything with her body. Therefore, when Hitomi is very scared or in danger, her power protects her itself. Madara chuckled, moved closer to the bride and put his palm on her head. Hitomi shuddered and froze. Her chakra began to gather in the girl's body, and Hitomi looked into her fiancé's eyes in surprise. How did you do that? Sharingan? Hashirama tried to peer into his best friend's face, but there were no devilish eyes in them. Strange. Hashirama drawled. Hitomi, why didn't you react to my touch, but to the palm of this? Anai-san pointed his finger at Madara. You came to your senses. Anai-san, it's not about you or him. Hitomi had already come to her senses and was sitting on her knees. Madara removed his hand from the bride's head. It's all about the gesture. Hitomi put her hand on her head where Madara's hand had just been. Mom did that. That's why I calmed down. Hashirama scratched the back of his head guiltily and smiled a stupid smile, apparently remembering this. Hitomi began to try to get up from the ground. Seeing her attempts, the older brother immediately grabbed the girl by the arm and helped her finally get up. The girl shook herself off and looked with a guilty smile at her companions, who also got up. Having looked at them, Hitomi sharply leaned forward in a low bow. Hey, Hitomi, what's wrong? Hashirama began to circle his sister like a mother hen, but at the same time he didn't know what exactly to do. I just wanted to thank you for saving me. The girl returned to her upright position. Well, Madara did the most here. Hashirama stopped next to his friend and scratched his head again in guilt. He neutralized everyone. I went straight to you. Madara just chuckled, turned around and moved in the opposite direction from the Senju relatives. Bye, Madara! Hashirama called out goodbye and hugged his sister by the shoulders. Goodbye, Madara. The girl said goodbye not as loudly as her brother and pressed herself against her brother's body, because the trembling from what happened had not yet completely left her. Madara, without turning his head, raised his right hand in a farewell gesture. See you tomorrow. Hitomi muttered under her breath so that no one else could hear her. Chapter 5 The wedding of Uchiha Madara and Hitomi Senju, now Uchiha, was modest. It took place in the Uchiha clan temple, with no one else present except for the closest relatives. Both families decided that there should be no extra people, although all members of the two clans were aware of the changes taking place. All these days of preparation, various rumors were circulating among people, but before the wedding itself, everyone was read an official statement from the heads of the peace treaty and that the war between the clans had ceased. Of course, no one went into details. After the wedding ceremony, everyone went to the house of the head of the Uchiha clan and the fathers signed a peace treaty, and the newlyweds went to their new home. Madara decided that it was better for them to live in a separate house than to be crowded with his father and younger brother. So now the young man in a traditional Japanese wedding suit walked with his new wife, who was dressed in a crimson kimono, and on her back was the crest of the Uchiha clan. Madara slowed down a little and now walked behind the girl. Her long silver hair, recently gathered in a beautiful hairstyle that Hitomi could not stand, now fell in light waves down, almost reaching the ground. The wind blew and Hitomi threw her shock of hair to one side so that it would not get tangled in a gust of wind. "So it was you after all, Hitomi Senju." Madara closed his eyes remembering his dream, but feeling that the girl had stopped, he opened his onyx eyes again and looked straight at the girl. "Madara, did something happen?" The girl looked worriedly at her husband's face and tried to find a clue as to what had happened to him. Having thrown out the phrase, "Don't worry about it," Madara overtook the girl and hurried to their new house. There was very little left. The girl exhaled tiredly and hurried to catch up with her husband, and caught up with him. She understood perfectly well that Madara would not open up to her, much less trust her. This would take a lot of time, most likely a lot of time. Having crossed the threshold of the house, the young couple stood shoulder to shoulder. Hitomi raised her head and looked towards her husband. "What now?" The man glanced at her briefly and walked straight down the long corridor. Now that his father had appointed Madara as the head of the clan and handed over all authority, he needed to sort out all the documents, scrolls, and other crap that he didn't want to do at all. "You can look around the house, I'll be in my office, don't distract me once again." Leaving the girl alone, he disappeared behind one of the sides of this house. Hitomi sighed heavily. What else could she expect? That he would throw himself into the arms of his enemy and swear eternal love. The girl chuckled at her thoughts and decided to walk around the house. Having passed through all the rooms, except for one, the matrimonial bedroom, the girl went to the garden. In the backyard there was a beautiful pond. A sad smile slid across the face of the newly made Uchiha, Senju, remembering her childhood, when the pond in her father's house was her only friend and listener. Hitomi went to the pond, new to her, and sat down near it, lowering her bare feet. The water was warm and tickled the thin legs of the hyme. Enjoying the sun setting over the horizon, the girl did not notice how her husband was watching her. Madara, arms crossed on his chest, looks at his betrothed and does not disturb her idol. He perfectly understands what situation she is in now. That is why he left her alone during the day, so that she could think everything over and accept her thoughts, which were like a swarm of bees hovering in her head. Hitomi began to move her fingers, and the water slowly began to take simple forms. It looked mesmerizing. But Madara remembered Hashirama's words about the assassination attempts on Hitomi. "It's late, let's go into the house." The girl shuddered because she thought she was alone here. Turning her head towards her betrothed, she nodded, rose from her seat and brushed off her crimson kimono, and went to her husband. The man led his wife into the house and followed her. They stopped near the shoji in the marital bedroom. The young man put his hand on Hitomi's shoulder. "Go to bed, I'll be in my office, I need to finish some things." The girl looked at her husband and nodded slightly, and went into the bedroom. There was a double futon spread out in the room. Exhaling heavily, she went into the depths of the room and began to untie her kimono. It was not an easy task. She had to fiddle a little with the belt, and then the silk fabric itself flowed down the girl's thin and neat shoulders. Having hung her wedding kimono in the closet, the girl put on a night yukata and lay down on the futon. The girl lay with her eyes closed for several minutes. The house was deathly silent, pressing on the young wife of the head of the Uchiha clan. She could not fall asleep. Thoughts replaced each other in an endless stream in her head. Hitomi did not know what to do next, how to communicate with her husband, how to fulfill the most important part of the agreement, how not to destroy the peace that had come between the clans. All this did not allow her to fall asleep. The girl could not fall asleep until the middle of the night. Turning away from the entrance to the bedroom, she stared at the wall. Is Madara going to bed? It's already late at night. Then the girl heard the sound of the door opening and froze, did not turn around and abruptly closed her eyes, pretending to be asleep. The man fiddled with his clothes, and then silently lay down on the second half of the bed. Madara looked at the ceiling and listened to the measured breathing of his wife. I know you're not sleeping. The man's hoarse voice was deafening in the silence. The girl next to him began to turn and toss, and now she was lying facing her husband. You're right, I can't sleep in a new place. Hitomi began to examine her husband's profile. He has a straight, even nose with a slightly upturned tip. A sharp chin line, clear cheekbones. The man looked as if he had just been molded by a skilled sculptor, and in front of her was not a living person, but a magnificent sculpture. The girl does not deny it, she really admires her husband. Are you aware of the most important part of our agreement? The man glanced sideways at the former Haim of the Senju clan. The girl closed her eyes and turned onto her back. She nodded. If you don't want to rush, we can wait, we have a year for this. The girl thought about this for a long time. She was very afraid of their wedding night, but at the same time she understood perfectly well that the sooner she gave birth to a child, the faster such a fragile peace between the clans would settle down. She made a decision. I don't want to wait, the girl whispered quietly, still with her eyes closed. Feeling someone else's breath near her face, Hitomi opened her eyes and met the gaze of onyx eyes. Madara was hanging over her with his whole body and examining every millimeter of her body. Are you sure? A slight nod of the head from the wife, and the man decided to act. He will be gentle with her as he has never been with anyone, because he understands perfectly well that for her this is the first night with a man. Madara wants to leave a pleasant impression of their night spent together. The girl is fragile, although she tries to pretend that she is strong, but she has not seen all the horror that he has seen, and Madara does not want her to know what pain is. Now she will be under his protection. He gently touched her porcelain skin, which was cool due to the night temperature. The man watched the reaction to his touches, to kisses. The girl either opened her eyes wide if Madara touched her in unexpected places for her, or blissfully closed her eyes when the man touched her neck with soft lips. He began to untie her night yukata. The girl blushed and carefully watched her husband's hands. Left completely naked before him, she wanted to cover herself so that he would not look at her body with such a desired glance. And there was something to look at. Firm small breasts rose and fell with the girl's breathing, a thin waist and voluminous hips. The man liked all of this, but most of all he liked that she was only his, not belonging to anyone before, only his. And it will always be so. Chapter 6 The sun penetrated the room with light rays and slid across the tender face of the girl who was sleeping sweetly on the futon. Wrinkling her nose, the girl began to wake up, slowly opening her eyes. Opening her eyelids, she stretched her arms sweetly and rubbed her sleepy face with her palms. The girl ran her hand along the adjacent side and felt the soft fabric, which had already cooled down in the absence of the man, and the bed linen. She exhaled in frustration and got up from her lying place. The girl looked out the window. The weather was beautiful outside and decided that today she would take a walk around the clan's outskirts. She began to get ready. She most likely would not see her husband. He would be busy with clan affairs and would not have time for his wife. Putting on a dark blue summer yukata with a small pattern of white flowers, the girl went outside. Taking a deep breath, Hitomi Uchiha stepped onto the road. Coming out onto the main street, the girl walked slowly and looked at the houses, people, the area as a whole. From people she received looks of surprise, disgust, and interest. Hitomi tried not to pay attention to it, because she understood perfectly well that everyone, including herself, needed to get used to the changes. Stopping near a small playground, which had a small wooden sandbox and 2 wooden swings, she began to watch the children playing. A slight smile appeared on the face of the white-haired beauty. Several children noticed her. At first there was surprise on their faces, and then they all ran towards her. Instinctively, the girl took a slight step back so as not to be knocked down by the crowd of children. They began to look at her. "Can I touch your hair, mistress?" A little girl with short black hair looked at Hitomi from under her bangs, which covered her eyes. The little girl, embarrassed, hid her hands, folded into a lock, behind her back. "Of course." Im smiled and squatted down so that the girl could comfortably touch them. With a slight shudder in her shoulders as the little braid lover ran her hand through her hair, the girl relaxed and closed her eyes. "You have very beautiful hair, mistress. And you yourself are beautiful." The boy, having said this, abruptly turned away from her. "Thank you." Hitomi blushed, as did the boy. Touching his head, she smiled at him tenderly. "Hey guys, why are you bothering him?" A stern and familiar voice for Hitomi rang out. The guys flinched, but did not retreat. The girl stood up and looked at the young man. "Izuna-san, everything is fine. We were just talking with the guys." She smiled with her eyes and called all the children. They ran up to her and hugged her, and she in return. After the hugs, the guys ran to the playground to play their games, which only they know. "Did something happen?" Feeling a man next to her, she asked Time. "Madara lost you, she told me to find you." The husband's younger brother also looked at the children, putting her hands in her pants pocket. "Should we go to him?" The man shrugged and turned around, heading back towards the house. He walked slowly, waiting for Hitomi to do more. "If you want," he threw to the girl. She looked at Izuna and ran to catch up with him. Who knows, maybe Madara will get angry if she doesn't come back. She didn't want to anger her husband at all, and their relationship was already shaky. Having caught up and drawn level with the guy, Hitomi walked to the left of his shoulder. He was a whole head taller than her, like most men. Hitomi was of average height, neither tall nor short. But she looked up to most people. "You have it nice here," she said, looking around the area again. Yes, the man glanced furtively at the girl and turned back, looking straight at the road. Maybe he wanted to keep up the conversation with her, but he didn't know what about it, and whether there was any point. His brother's decision was not easy for him. Izuna would not soon be able to forget that protracted war that took the lives of clan members, his brothers. Maybe the agreement put an end to the disagreements, but the memories were still too fresh for the emotional wounds to heal so easily in such a short time. The way home was quick. Hitomi hadn't gone as far as it turned out. Although it turned out she hadn't been home for a decent amount of time, the sun was already high in the sky. Having already approached the house, they stopped at the porch. "Would you like to come in for a cup of tea?" The girl did not turn around to look at the young man. It was not a gesture of decency. She really wanted him to come into the house, and she was not in the clan estate with only her husband, because he would sit in his study, and she would have to spend time alone again. Izuna looked at the girl with distrust, but nodded in agreement, and they went into the house together. Izuna decided to go to his brother's office, especially since that was what he was going for, and Hitomi went to make tea. When the girl was already preparing a tray with a hot drink, the men were already sitting on the veranda with an exit to the backyard. Their poses were identical: crossed legs in the lotus position, straight backs and crossed arms on the chest. They were quietly talking to each other. Only sounds reached Hitomi, but she could not make out the words. Taking the tray in her hands, she went to them. The girl walked very quietly. Snow-white cotton socks allowed her to walk around the house silently. When she had already approached the young men, they were no longer talking. Madara remained in the same pose, but with his eyes closed. Izuna lowered his legs down, and now they hung from the veranda, and he put his hands behind his back and leaned on them behind himself. "The tea is ready." The girl sat down between the men a little behind them and placed the tray on the wooden deck of the veranda. Madara slowly opened his eyes so that they could get used to the sunlight, and turned his head towards the girl. He calmly glanced at his wife's figure. She was already holding a clay bowl with tea in her hands and gently blew on the liquid so that the drink would cool down faster. The girl brought the bowl to her lips and slowly opened her mouth and pressed it to the clay surface. The man tore his gaze away from Hitomi and finally picked up the drink. Madara turned back towards the garden and took a sip of tea. The hot liquid pleasantly warmed the surface of his throat and left a pleasant aftertaste. He blissfully closed his eyes. Now he has a lot of worries, and these quiet moments give him a feeling of peace, albeit for a short time. "Are you okay? You're too serious." The soft, yet worried voice of the newly minted Uchiha brought the two shinobi out of their own thoughts. My eyesight is getting worse. Madara's slightly hoarse voice reached the people sitting next to him. In a while, I will go completely blind. The girl shuddered at what she heard. She couldn't even imagine that he had poor eyesight. This man was a first-class ninja. He gave a feeling of confidence and stability. But in fact, he didn't show or tell anyone about his weakness. Is there anything we can do about it? Hitomi moved closer to her husband and looked in his direction. She tried to see at least some emotion on his face. But the man seemed to have turned to stone. Not a single muscle twitched. He needs an eye transplant. The answer came from the other side. Turning around, the girl caught Izuna's eyebrows drawn together. The young man stood up abruptly and found himself in front of the newlyweds. Madara, I can give you my eyes, the guy said confidently. No, the long-haired man answered categorically, still with his eyes closed. Why don't you want to accept his eyes? Hitomi turned her whole body towards her husband and placed her neat palm on his shoulder. The man twitched slightly. Because it's a dangerous operation and there are great risks. Madara spoke very calmly, without expressing a single emotion. I don't care about the risks. Izuna shouted and crossed his arms over his chest. He looked at his brother with a confident and angry expression. The older brother opened his eyes and looked straight into the onyx stones of his younger brother. I think you should listen to Izuna, Madara. The girl carefully ran her hand over her husband's shoulder, afraid to scare him away. She was being careful with him, like with a predator, because she didn't know how he would react to such a display of tenderness, care, and in general, to her touch. The young head of the clan exhaled heavily. You've convinced me. He rose abruptly from the veranda, thereby throwing off his wife's hand that was stroking his shoulder. Madara disappeared behind the shoji, leaving his younger brother and wife behind. The sun had already begun to set. It was the golden hour, outside, which illuminated the backyard beautifully. Izuna shook his head from side to side, waved his hand goodbye to the girl and left their beautiful garden. Hitomi was left alone sitting on the veranda and catching the last rays of this day, watching the setting sun. Chapter 7 The moon is high in the sky. Light dark clouds float past it and slightly cover the bright spot in the sky. For a moment the moon's glow disappears, but as soon as the air blankets fly away, it begins to illuminate the night sky again. A girl stands in a dark garden, near a pond, and watches the heavenly queen reflected in the water. The young wife of the clan leader watches in fascination as a light breeze sways the water in the pond and an even round glare of the moon spreads in waves across the surface of the water. The girl clasped her shoulders with her hands and shivered, wrapping herself more tightly in a light blanket. She has not been able to sleep peacefully for 2 days now. Her husband and his brother, the day after they discussed the eye transplant plan, went to the operation. So far, no one has shown up, and she is not allowed to see them. Hitomi is too nervous and scared to sleep alone in this empty and huge house, so she spends most of the night sitting on the porch or in the backyard waiting for her husband to return. There are dark spots under her eyes, indicating lack of sleep. Staring at the water surface, the girl was so absorbed in her thoughts that she didn't notice how someone walked onto the veranda and was watching her closely. Why aren't you asleep yet? A firm voice reached the girl's ears, and she jerked in surprise and stumbled on the edge of the lake. Her foot began to fall into the water and the girl's body, by inertia, began to fall forward straight into the lake. But the fall never happened. She was suddenly caught by the wrist and pulled towards herself. Just as abruptly as she was caught, she was turned towards herself, and she rested her forehead against a strong male chest. Thank you, Hitomi said quietly and began to look at the man's shoes, just not into his eyes. I repeat, why aren't you sleeping? The man's voice was also quiet, but there were notes of irritation in it. He looked at her from head to toe, his gaze caught on the noticeable bags under her eyes, which indicate that she hasn't slept for a long time. Involuntarily, his jaw muscles visibly tensed. I couldn't sleep. She, still looking at her feet, went towards the house. Madara followed her. Like her shadow, he moved silently. The man looked closely at the back of his wife's head. Hitomi felt the heavy gaze on her person, but try not to pay attention to it. Once they were together on the futon, the girl moved closer to her husband and carefully made her way under his arm and lay her head on his strong chest, and wrapped her arm around his torso and pressed herself closer to the man. "How did it go?" Hitomi asked, closing her eyes. She felt calmer next to her husband, and sleep came easily to her now. The eyes have taken root, isn't it feels good? He began to stroke the girl's bare shoulder, enjoying the smooth skin. The actions were more reflexive. The man himself was absorbed in his thoughts. His gaze was directed at the ceiling. "How do you feel?" Already fully enjoying the warmth of someone else's body, the girl fell into the kingdom of dreams. "I'm fine," the man answered dryly, and when his wife finally fell asleep, he did not move away from her. Madara placed his chin gently on the top of his wife's light head and also fell asleep. Once again, the white space covered the young clan leader's vision. Madara examines the place where the dream placed him. Once again, he sees a silhouette in the distance and runs towards it. Madara already knows perfectly well what will happen next, because he lied to Izuna that the dream no longer bothers him. No. Nothing has changed. He married Hitomi Senju, but she still appears in his head during sleep. Now the young shinobi is absolutely sure that his wife is in this dream. Now she shows him her face. Here he caught up with her and follows her. She is still wearing a white kimono made of flowing silk, which stretches behind her in a small train. Her beautiful silver hair flutters from her leisurely steps. The girl stops and turns to him. The gaze of crimson pupils, enveloped in long beautiful eyelashes, is directed at him. She holds out her fragile and neat palm. "Come with me, Madara." He was just about to take hold of her open palm when he was thrown out of his own dream. Opening his eyes abruptly, he lifts his head and looks around. The matrimonial bedroom, his wife still lying on his chest and hugging him tenderly, sweetly snoring. The sun begins to peek out from under the horizon and illuminate a new day. Exhaling heavily, he leans back on the pillow. How will this dream end? What should he understand? What information does this dream convey to him? After all, it is not for nothing that he dreams all this. Chapter 8 A month has passed since the wedding of Madara Uchiha and Hitomi Senju. A month of truce between the two warring clans. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief and began to breathe more freely. Now they do not have to be tense every time, they can relax a little. The fear of death and murder has faded into the background. The Uchiha clan accepted Hitomi, the former Senju, as the wife of their head and began to respect her no less than the people from the main branch. Hitomi loved to walk around the clan's territory and communicate with the locals, find out how they were feeling, whether they were happy with everything. The girl especially liked to play with the little ones. These are the rays of happiness for which this whole process of the union was started. Often Madara's wife looked in on his father and brother at home. Taijima had always been a strict father, a wise head and a sensible shinobi. No one could have guessed that he would show sympathy for his daughter-in-law. With her arrival, she began to warm the soul of a man who had lost his wife and several sons. For him, the girl became a joy in the last days of his life. She often looked in on him for a cup of aromatic green tea. During this month, Hitomi became very fond of the Uchiha clan, devoting herself entirely to it. She had no time to visit her relatives, but she did not dare to forget about them and always remembered them, promising herself to visit them every time. The relationship with her husband became much warmer than before. But lately, Madara often disappeared outside the house, sometimes even outside the clan's territory. He came home late, tired and exhausted, and immediately lay down on the futon, falling asleep. Trying to attract attention to her person, she once woke up early so as not to miss her husband's departure. Madara Hitomi addressed Ato, who was already putting on his shinobi shoes. "I want you to help me with my training." The girl clasped her hands behind her back and looked at her husband from under her long eyelashes, framing her berry-colored eyes. The young man stopped, distracted from his work, and turned to his wife. The girl stood humbly in her light blue yukata and waited for her husband's answer. "No." The answer was very short. Without saying anything else, the man left the house. With a heavy sigh, the girl unclasped the lock from her hands and desperately clenched her fists. Gathering her courage, she decided to disobey her husband, for the first time in their life together. Having left the marital nest, Hitomi tried to move around the clan's territory as unnoticed as possible by everyone. With quick steps, she covered the area in the shadow of the houses. She was lucky that at this time of day, not many people decided to leave their family shelters. Most of the clanmates were still dozing in their warm homes, sprawled in various positions on cotton futons, wrapped in a soft blanket. The terrible and powerful Uchihas looked completely harmless during sleep, which is not to say that most of these people are endowed with the gift of cursed eyes. Healthy sleep is important for everyone, and shinobi of a strong clan treasure moments of blissful peace. Hitomi glanced behind her and left the clan's borders, going out through the huge gate. Once outside the clan's borders, a mighty forest appeared before her eyes. Majestic trees towered over the girl, who was walking along a small path towards the river. This path was known only to her. No one else except the fair-haired beauty had ever walked here. She was moving towards her water element. The sound of the water flow now began to reach the girl's ears, who was constantly moving forward in order to pass the morning forest. Hitomi approached the river bank and inhaled the river air, which was filled with morning coolness. Her lungs were filled with the fresh, long-awaited oxygen of the river. It was different from any other. This was what she had needed for a long time. A blissful feeling of unity with her natural element. Directing a steady stream of chakra into her feet, Hitomi stepped onto the surface of the water. Slowly walking towards the center of the river, she ran a light palm through the air and a trail of water stretched behind her. Focusing on the streams of chakra in her body, Hitomi began to transform it into a natural form, allowing her body to control the resource available to her in large quantities. The water gave the princess of the Senju clan the opportunity to manipulate itself as she pleased. Light movements around its axis, and now the river current changed direction and began to spin around the girl. Hitomi raised her gaze to the sky through the water tunnel. The sky was cloudless today, the day promised to be clear. Enjoying the integrity with the water element, the clanging of metal began to reach the girl through the noise of the water. Losing concentration, the water abruptly sank back into the river, wetting Hitomi's summer yukata. Wet spots appeared on the cotton fabric from the splashes of the descending water. Catching the source of the sound of the battle, the clan leader's wife ran across the water's surface in the direction of the noise. Finding herself at the place where the sounds were coming from, the girl fell into a stupor. From both banks of the river, two people dear to her were flying at each other. Their gazes were focused on their simultaneous attacks. The men's long hair fluttered during a long jump towards the enemy. The weapons were clearly aimed at the opposite opponent. Hitomi, without waiting for the end of the attacks, abruptly came to her senses, erected a water wall between them. The men did not expect an obstacle, but thanks to the reaction of the shinobi, they simultaneously pushed off the water obstacle with their feet. With chakra directed at them, each jumped to their own bank and with their eyebrows drawn together looked towards the still frightened girl. She thought that the signed treaty would help stop the fighting between the clans and the people dear to her would not try to kill each other. And what does she see in front of her now? In the midst of magnificent nature, on the surface of the river, her older brother and husband, fighting against each other, extremely serious. Because of the fear for the lives of these unbearable men, her heart beats at a frantic pace, not going to stop. Haim's legs suddenly give way, so that she falls on her fragile knees with her arms hanging down along her slender body. "Hitomi?" Hashirama says in surprise, and in one jump he finds himself next to his little sister. He did not expect to see his Imuto. Supporting the girl by the shoulders, he helps her get up from the water surface. Hitomi, on cotton legs, tries to hold on, but weakened, finds herself in a strong brotherly embrace. A man with long, pointed hair, spread out in different directions and shimmering blue in the sun, approached the family reunion. "What's gotten into you?" Hashirama's trembling voice came through his black turtleneck, which clung to his toned male body. "We were just training, Hitomi," the man said in a soft voice, stroking the back of his sister's head, enjoying the softness of her long silver hair. "Were you training?" The girl breaks away from her brother and looks at her Ani with her crimson eyes. A slight nod and a gentle smile lights up Hashirama's tanned face, and he ruffles his younger sister's hair on the top of her head. "What are you doing here?" A stern voice comes from her right. Turning her head, she meets a serious gaze of onyx eyes. She tilts her head slightly to the side and peers into her husband's face. I heard the clanking of metal and decided to see what was going on, the cold man's wife says, having calmed down. You shouldn't have left the clan's territory. It could have been enemy shinobi. His eyebrows drawn together on the bridge of his nose, indicating his displeasure with the whole situation. Hashirama, standing very close to the married couple, darted his gaze, not understanding, from one to the other spouse. You didn't agree to train me, so I decided to go to the river myself. She folded her arms across her chest, lifting her firm breasts higher. Otto exhaled heavily. That doesn't mean you should have gone to the battlefield. He also crosses his arms, just like her. You should have immediately gone to the clan and informed me, Izuna, or our father about this. The girl felt like she was being scolded like a little child, but only the Uchiha's best friend in this situation understands that this is how he tries to show concern and care for the safety of his little sister. Laughing at this whole situation, the tall man pats his friend on the shoulder, hugging him. Calm down, Madara. Stop worrying, it's all right after all. Madara tried to shake off his friend's hand, but the latter had stuck to him like a leech and wouldn't let go. So what do you think of my proposal, Madara? Let's build a village together. The dark-haired man nodded positively to his friend's question, but he didn't take his eyes off his wife. Excellent! The man exclaimed. Let's unite everyone. And he pulled his sister and friend even closer to him. A wide smile lit up his face. He was happy that he was able to persuade his former enemy, but best friend, after so much time to create the great village. They were in for a difficult time, but they would be able to achieve peace, for the sake of future generations. Chapter 9 The last rays of the sun have set, and the crimson sunset covers the territory of the Uchiha clan with its beautiful shade of sweet berries. The last day of summer was sunny and cloudless, and such a bright sunset suggests that the first day of autumn will also be warm. Many clan members slowly walk to their homes to dine on a wonderful home-cooked meal and spend the rest of the evening with their families. Lonely shinobi do not spend the evening in an empty estate. Many of them gather in groups and drink a bottle of sake, cheerfully chatting with each other, with cheeks red from the alcohol they have drunk. A young ninja slowly walked along the main street of his clan, carefully carrying in his arms a girl who was sleeping rhythmically and breathing into his chest. A shock of silver hair fell from Hitomi's body and almost reached the dusty road with its tips, but the man, thanks to his reaction, managed to catch them and return them to their original place. Wrinkling her nose from the abrupt change in the position of her body, in time for her husband's simple machination to catch her hair, Hitomi pressed herself more tightly against the strong male chest. Madara glanced at the girl's face with a fleeting, affectionate glance and immediately returned his gaze to the road, looking straight at the almost empty road. The rare passers-by cast quick glances at the young married couple and barely had time to bow their heads in greeting to the leader. As the newlyweds disappeared from their field of vision, having caught the entrance shoji with his toe, Madara slowly, trying not to disturb the sweet sleep of his wife, pushed it aside and went into the estate. Taking off his shoes without hands, throwing them off in disarray, he went to their shared bedroom. Fortunately, the futon was already spread out, and he only needed to carefully place his wife on it and cover her with a blanket. Having gotten rid of the burden, he began to stretch his hands, numb from wearing them for a long time, and went to his study. He had enough problems with the clan, but now, because of Hitomi's obnoxious older brother, who had decided to create a single hidden village, he had added a bunch of scrolls that required immediate reading and a reply to the addressee he had fought with today, before his wife arrived. He tiredly rubbed his neck, relaxing it, and sat down on the tatami in front of a small table on which lay many scrolls. Having opened the first of many scrolls, he ran his eyes over it and began to write a reply letter. How he wished now that he could throw all these papers and lie down on the futon, with his blonde wife sleeping next to him. He would close his eyes and listen to her breathing, and sometimes make involuntary faces when she was dreaming about something. Turning to the girl, the young shinobi would immediately fall asleep, and the warm breath on his bare chest would give him a feeling of peace. In a month he had become so accustomed to the girl from another clan. Without trying, she penetrated into his very soul, hidden behind numerous walls. His heart, previously open only to his younger brother, Izuna, he was ready to give his life for him. But now, slowly but surely, right into the hearth of his life, a light and such a pleasant, unobtrusive feminine care slipped. Shaking his head, he drove away the thoughts that had so tempted him and returned to the unfinished papers, which described in detail how the village should be created and under what conditions. The start of the day was not the best. Hitomi woke up with an unpleasant feeling in her stomach and a sharp, stabbing pain in her chest. Grasping her chest with her palm, the girl tried to get up from the futon, but the pain in her lower abdomen twisted her, and she fell back onto the pillow. I turned my head towards the window. It was still dark outside, so it was early morning. Turning over on the other side, Hitomi noticed that her husband was sleeping next to her on his side, with his right hand under the pillow and his left next to his face. Nausea was added to all the unpleasant sensations and, unable to bear it, she overcame the pain from the malaise and headed to the bathroom with quick but quiet steps. Finding herself in the abode of cleanliness, the girl abruptly fell to her knees and grabbed her stomach, covering her mouth with her palm. But vomiting did not follow, only a nauseating urge. She sat in this position for several minutes. When the spasms subsided, crawling to the cool wall, Hitomi leaned her back against the cold tiles. Enjoying the coolness coming from the wall, she closed her eyes, still holding her stomach. A knock on the door made her open her eyes out of surprise and turn her gaze to the sliding door. She did not answer, but waited for further action from her husband. There was no one else to knock on the bathroom in their house early in the morning. The paper partition slightly opens and her husband's shaggy, sleepy head pokes through a small crack. "Is everything all right?" A worried look clings to his wife, who is sitting hunched over on the floor and holding her stomach. She shakes her head and closes her eyes again, squeezing her hand on her stomach harder when the pain returns. A stately man, who is now in dark cotton home pants and bare-chested, approaches the girl and squats in front of her. He had just recently finished sorting out all the scrolls and went to bed, and was already falling asleep, when his wife suddenly jumped up from her half and went to the bathroom. After lying there for a while, but not hearing any sounds, he decided to check on her. And he finds Haim hunched over on the cold floor, near the wall. "What happened?" He puts his hand on her shoulder and gently began to stroke her shoulder, slightly exposed from the slipped-off night yukata. "Water," she says in a slightly hoarse voice. "Bring me some water, please." And closes her eyes, squinting. The man disappears into the corridor, not closing the door, leaving it slightly open. Returning, he hands her the long-awaited liquid. Having drunk all the contents, Hitomi breathes a sigh of relief. "Better?" he asks. She nods and hands him the glass back. Madara places it next to the shelf next to the sink and walks up to his wife. He carefully picks her up and carries her to the bed. Covering her with a blanket, the man lies down next to her and pulls her close, breathing on the top of her head. "Thank you," she says quietly and closes her eyes. Now they can sleep again. The daylight is high in the sky. It is a calm and peaceful time in the Senju clan's territory. In the clan estate, the strongest shinobi of the two clans and their heads are sitting behind one of the shoji, discussing and holding a conversation about the creation of the great village in the Land of Fire. Two long-haired women stroll through the vast garden inside the mansion. As Hitomi surveyed the surroundings of her parents' home, memories came flooding back. "I remember how I used to peek from behind these bushes at my brother's training, when their father would tell them about new techniques." A slight smile lit up the young girl's face. "And how unsuccessful their first attempts to implement them in life were." Covering her with her palm, she quietly laughed. The older woman smiled tenderly and bowed her head towards her daughter. Hitomi threw a shock of silver hair over her right shoulder, and now the Uchiha clan mark was clearly visible on her back. The two beautiful ladies stopped near a huge pond, near which Hitomi spent most of her childhood. The girl's mother ran her hand through her only daughter's hair and tucked a strand of hair that had fallen out of the rest of her hair behind her ear and turned her whole body towards her daughter and hugged her tightly. They had not seen each other for over a month. She was worried about her daughter and how she was doing in her new home. "Are you okay, Musum?" She released him from his embrace, but did not push him away, and looked into the eyes of her youngest. "Everything is fine, Mom." But the girl fell silent. Should I tell my mother about what happened this morning? When her daughter fell silent mid-sentence, the mother's heart skipped a strong beat in alarm, and she began to peer into her baby's face with a worried look. This morning, I woke up with chest pain and nausea. It was so bad. Hitomi looked down and clasped her hands in front of her in a lock, pressing them to her chest. A relieved sigh was heard from her mother, and the girl raised her uncomprehending gaze to her mother. The wife of the former head of the Senju clan looked at her daughter with a gentle smile and placed her hand on her stomach, with slightly highlighted medical chakra. Her guess was confirmed, and she hugged her daughter tightly. You did it, Hitomi. She kissed Muzum on the forehead and did not let her go from her embrace. The young girl's eyes widened from her mother's words. Really? Flashed through her head. Letting go of her hands from the embrace, Hitomi placed her palms on her stomach, releasing light waves of green glow. Hitomi felt a light, completely imperceptible and such a quiet beating, still very tiny heart, through chakra, and tears appeared on the edges of her eyes. In order not to burst into tears, she buried her face in her mother's shoulder. Chapter 10 Time flies so quickly, imperceptibly replacing minutes with hours, hours with days, and then a week flies by unnoticed, and you don't notice it at all, immersed in your thoughts. That's how a week passed for Hitomi. The news that she was pregnant stunned her. The young, now future mother, could not decide what to do. She was very happy with this news. It meant that the main point of the agreement was feasible, and would soon be realized in reality. But she was very worried about the thought of how to tell the future father about this. How would he react to this news? What will the future baby be like? Will he be healthy, happy, and most importantly loved? He will definitely be desired, because everyone is waiting for his birth. Loading herself with these thoughts, she did not notice how she reached the outskirts of the clan and is now standing in front of the beginning of a mighty forest. The nature in the area of the future village for shinobi is diverse. There is a forest, a river, and also a rocky area. She was about to turn around and go home, but changed her mind and went into the thick of the green lands. Breathing in the aroma of coniferous and deciduous trees, her soul becomes calm, her thoughts are put in order. There is a name for such walks in Japanese: Shinrin-yoku. Literally it is translated as Shinrin, forest, yoku, bath. Doing Shinrin-yoku, you seem to plunge into the forest atmosphere, absorb it, and thereby cleanse your body, thoughts, your spiritual part. Everything is put in order. Walking along the forest paths, Hitomi threw away all the thoughts that were troubling her and simply enjoyed the moment. Only now did she feel that important answers would come to her themselves. There was no need to wind herself up now. Everything will happen as it should, and nothing else. On the way back, Hitomi decided to visit Taijima-sama. She had not visited him for a long time. The man is no longer as healthy as before. He is slowly losing his sight and becoming physically weak. As soon as he felt changes in himself for the worse, he transferred all the rights of governance to his eldest son. For Taijima Uchiha, the truce between the clan was difficult. He was so used to and accustomed to the idea that he lives for the sake of battles. Hatred for the Senju clan consumed him in those moments, that it is difficult to switch to a peaceful way of life. In his native estate, he is mostly alone. Izuna leaves in the morning and trains somewhere, sometimes alone, sometimes with his brother or some clansman. Therefore, the father of the great shinobi of the Uchiha clan spends his days alone. And he is very pleased when his new daughter, whom he never had, visits him. At first, he treated her coldly, perhaps with some contempt. The adult shinobi ignored all her approaches for a long time, but then, after numerous attempts, he finally gave in. And he does not regret what happened one bit. Sitting down on the porch of her husband's father's estate, Hitomi began to take off her shoes and, with bare feet slapping on the wooden floor, walked around the house along the veranda. The backyard was not at all quiet, as she was used to. Usually, when she appeared in this house, Taijima Uchiha was either sitting on the veranda or in the house, meditating. But now her husband and Izuna were practicing techniques with cold weapons, and the man she came to was sitting on the wooden flooring and watching his sons, occasionally throwing in some phrase about their techniques or movements. The girl sat down next to her father-in-law, lowering her thin legs to hang from the veranda, covered with a dark crimson yukata. It's great that you're all here. The girl slightly bowed her head, watching Madara lunge towards his Otutu. Izuna didn't lose his head and jumped away from his brother, jumping over him from above, pushing off the ground with his feet, and found himself behind his Ani. Madara wasn't surprised at all, he just dodged his brother's attack from behind. Is something wrong, Hitomi? The man with short, tousled hair on the back of his head did not even turn towards his daughter-in-law, watching the smallest movements of his sons. The girl nodded, knowing that her father-in-law would notice her movement with his peripheral vision, and put her hands folded in a lock on her still flat stomach. That's it, finish it. A confident voice shouted from the left of Madara's young wife, causing her to flinch slightly, not expecting such a thing. The brothers at the last moment joined forces in cold weapons, and jumped away from each other. A nod of the head and they headed towards the house. The two shinobi cast a fleeting glance at the arriving girl and sat down on opposite sides of their relatives. So what did you want to tell us all, Hitomi? The girl lowered her gaze to her hands, and not daring to say, began to fidget with her fingers, bending them in different directions, just to collect her thoughts. Noticing her actions, Madara placed his broad, calloused hand from numerous battles and training on the girl's palms. She perked up from her husband's touch, turned her head in his direction, and he nodded to her, letting her know that she should start talking. A deep breath in and out. There will be an addition to the family, the girl said, and felt how after her words the man's hand squeezed her hand even tighter. Looking at Madara again, the girl caught his serious but empty gaze as if he was not here now, but somewhere else, and his eyebrows knitted together on the bridge of his nose. Unbeknownst to the couple, the father and younger brother left them, leaving them alone on the veranda. Madara Hitomi turned her whole body towards him, attracting her husband's attention, but he did not react in any way. The young wife pulled her palm out of his, still holding it with a strong grip, and touched the man's cheekbone with a slightly cool hand and began to gently stroke it with her thumb. Madara put his forehead to his wife's pale forehead. How long have you known? His breath fanned her face, and a herd of goosebumps ran through her body from the closeness. A week ago. He exhaled heavily and pulled away from her, leaving only a trail of his scent. She inhaled it to enjoy this rare closeness of her husband. She wanted more affection from him. He stood up abruptly, jumping off the terrace, and took a few steps away from the girl. Why didn't you tell me earlier? He turned his head slightly towards the girl. Now his beautiful chiseled profile was illuminated by the sun, emphasizing his beautiful facial lines. I was scared. She also rose from her seat and walked lightly towards the man, wrapping her thin arms around his toned torso and resting her forehead on his powerful back, behind which she feels safe. Turning around in her arms, Madara grabbed Hitomi in a warm embrace. Thank you. He kissed her on the top of her light head and buried his nose in her silky hair and inhaled the scent that had already become so familiar, enjoying it. Hitomi squeezed his tight black training uniform tighter and inhaled the scent that was also familiar to her, giving her peace and confidence for the next day. It was a cloudy day, completely uncharacteristic of the land of fire, where the sun usually shines and the sky is clear, with rare clouds floating by. Raindrops fall on the stone tombstone, leaving wet paths behind them, rolling down the gravestone straight into the ground. Taijima Uchiha read the inscription on the tombstone. He was a great clan leader and a fearless shinobi. He will remain forever in our hearts. Uchihas are not cold and unfeeling monsters. No, they just keep everything inside, lock all their experiences in their hearts, and do not show anyone what is on their souls. The loss of a close and dear person affects their emotional state the most terrible way. They withdraw into themselves, lose contact with others. Hitomi tears her gaze away from the wet green grass and stumbles upon two male backs, their heads bowed, exposing their raven-colored hair to the drops of cold rain. Approaching the young men, she squeezes between their bodies and takes each one by the hand, giving them the support they so need at the moment. Izuna shudders and turns his head towards his brother's bride. She lets go of his cold palm and runs her own over his cheek, wiping away such an uninvited male tear. The man closes his eyes and presses his cheek even more tightly to Hitomi's palm, absorbing the soothing warmth. She adjusted the loose strands of hair that climbed into his onyx eyes and released her palm down, along her body. Izuna closed his eyes and lowered his head down. He is grateful to Hitomi for supporting him and his brother at that moment, for being next to them. It means a lot to him. Pressing her whole body against her husband, the girl grabbed his left hand with both of hers and laid her head on his shoulder. Madara turned his head towards his younger brother, and, meeting his gaze, nodded to him and laid his head on the light crown. So the three of them stood under the drops of mournful rain until it got dark. Commentary on Chapter 10. Thank you very much to everyone who reads this fanfic. I have a small request to the readers. If you see mistakes in the text, then correct me, please. The public beta is working. I will only be grateful to you for this. Also, if there are people who understand Japanese better than me, and there definitely are, I'm sure of it, then please let me know if I write a Japanese word incorrectly in the text, especially in family relationships. Chapter 11 Sitting on her husband's right hand in the seiza position, her palms gently placed on her knees, smoothing her silk kimono the color of ripe cherries, Hitomi listened attentively to the conversation of the people gathered in this room. She could not attend this meeting, but Madara considered that she was obliged to be here, as the wife of the head of the clan. Hitomi, of course, is important to know how Konoha will be built, the name of the village that best friends came up with, having gathered one evening in their favorite place. She is pleased that she is taken into account when deciding such serious issues in the life of the shinobi world. She sat on the side of the Uchiha clan, accompanied by her husband, Izuna, and two other elders of the clan, who were very positive characters in concluding a truce between the clans and the creation of the hidden village, having made a significant contribution to that matter. On the opposite side sat her older brothers, Hashirama in the center as the head of the Senju clan, Tobirama to his left, his father and mother, and one elder. Atsuko Senju is a kind elderly woman, the oldest of all the elders of the clan that Hitomi was born into. She delivered all of Butsuma and Noriko's children, so she knew them all and loved them as her own grandchildren, because Kami-sama did not give her the opportunity to experience the feeling of motherhood herself, so she believed that the children of the clan head were her grandchildren, whom she loved and cherished. Raising her soft brown eyes, Atsuko looked tenderly at Hitomi Uchiha. This little angel with silver hair, like two peas in a pod with her mother's hair, was the thread that united the two warring clans into a peaceful union. Not long ago, she was a tiny baby who was always peeping at her brothers, laughing and smiling tenderly at all her clanmates who were able to at least once look at the clan time. And now, this little girl herself carries her future baby under her heart. As a highly trained medic, she immediately saw the changes in Hitomi's chakra circulation, which was now directed towards protecting the fetus by enveloping it in a cocoon. Taking her gaze away from the princess, the old woman turned it to the table, on which was laid out a map and several scrolls with different hieroglyphs, which formed a coherent text of the rules and codes, the future residents of the shinobi. Are there any other clans we plan to invite to the future village? Atsuko-sama said, her voice slightly hoarse from age, and looked carefully at the current clan heads. Atsuko-sama, we are thinking of sending a makimono to clans such as Nara, Akimichi, Yamanaka, Aburame, Hyuga, with whom the construction of the hidden village was previously discussed. What about the Uzumaki? They would be great allies. A wise voice from the elder on the Uchiha side sounded. There's a small problem with these crimson demons. He chuckled, and then a small smirk appeared on Madara's face and a sly look was directed at Hashirama. Hitomi looked questioningly first at her husband, and then at her older brother, basically, as did everyone else gathered, except for Tobirama. He shook his head and crossed his arms over his chest, apparently knowing this very problem. So what's the problem with this clan? Hitomi spoke up for the first time since she was at this meeting. Enai-san turned to his little sister, and a brotherly smile lit up his face. He loved his sister madly. No matter what happened in their lives, Hashirama would always protect his Amuto, and it didn't matter that she was already grown up and married, he still worried about her. As you know, the Uzumaki do not trust everyone, and in order to be absolutely sure of this alliance, the Kage of the Hidden Whirlpool wants to strengthen the alliance. Hashirama folded his hands into a lock and placed them on the low table where everyone was sitting. Another marriage contract? Hitomi looked at her father. He was sitting with his arms crossed over his chest and a frowning gaze directed at the wooden surface in front of him. Exactly. Madara confirmed his father-in-law's thought. After these words, Nariko Senju covered her mouth with her hand and turned her worried gaze to her sons and the younger brother of the head of the Uchiha clan. But we won't bother ourselves with that for now. They won't join the alliance until the village is built and populated with new residents, so we still have a few months before the delegation from Yuzushiogakure arrives. A short pause, Hashirama glanced at everyone. We'll have several other meetings soon. When the village has an external appearance, the clan heads we talked about earlier will get to us. They stayed at the meeting for a few more hours. After talking about the population, they moved on to planning the Hidden Leaf village itself. With the help of the Senju clan shinobi, most of the buildings will be erected, thanks to Mokutan. Merchants and hired builders will also be invited. The sun was already setting behind the horizon. Everyone was emotionally exhausted, but they continued to discuss pressing issues. Hitomi was already getting sleepy. She was trying with all her might not to close her eyes right now, but was listening attentively to those gathered. Madara turned his gaze to his wife, just at the moment when she nodded her head and suddenly shook herself, driving away sleep. In her current state, she quickly got tired, and her legs went numb in an uncomfortable position for sitting for a long time. The head of the clan placed his broad palm on his wife's knee. She looked at him with a surprised look. Without answering, Madara returned to the conversation. I think we can call it a day. It's late, we've been sitting here all day. The man's calm voice interrupted one of his clan elders. The Senju family looked at him, then at the window, and blinked in surprise. Oh, you're right. Madara Hashirama scratched the back of his head, and a guilty smile appeared on his tanned face. Let's go our separate ways, we'll decide the rest at the next meeting. They walked together along the deserted street of the clan. She held his arm, lightly squeezing his dark sweater with her palm, which hugged her husband's fit body. The girl's hair was braided into an elastic braid, the tip of which almost reached the dusty ground. The silver braid swayed from side to side from the girl's smooth steps. His thick, tousled dark head of hair fell in a wild cascade down the man's back. The evening wind enveloped their bodies. Hitomi pressed herself closer to her husband, shivering from the tickling whirlwind. Madara only glanced calmly at his wife, but continued confidently walking towards their estate. Madara, the girl raised her crimson eyes to her husband's porcelain face. Tell me, why does a union need to be reinforced by marriage? Having finished, she turned her slightly saddened gaze to her feet, looking through them. Tradition, the man said heavily. He understood the meaning of her question. After all, they were also married through a marriage union, to establish peace between the clans, and now they want to marry someone to Uzumaki just so that Konoha has a strong ally. In our clan, they chose people with strong genes and married them to have a strong future generation. It all started with this. He placed his calloused, from numerous battles, palm on the pale and soft hand of his wife. And now, between clans they create a marriage contract to wedge their man into someone else's family and in the event of some unpleasant situation, take advantage of their position and ask for help. What about love? Hitomi stood in front of her husband and looked him straight in his onyx eyes. Isn't it important? Love can be the most powerful force that will move mountains if necessary. It will save you, support you, and make you move only forward. There is a flip side to the coin, where love is weakness. He peered calmly into her eyes. That weakness that drives you crazy. Once you lose love, you can no longer live in this world. The darkness consumes you, and you simply fly into the abyss from which there is no way to escape. You have to cling to the last threads in order to somehow continue to exist in this world. He pulled her to him, his strong embrace enveloping her fragile body. Hitomi buried her forehead in his chest and listened to his heartbeat, and his velvety voice slipped into her head. Even if you have lost love, you must rise to your feet, overcome your weakness, and find the strength to continue living for her. She inhaled his scent. A bouquet of musk and a light woody shade penetrated her lungs, giving peace. She broke away from the man and looked into his dark eyes like the night. He also looked at her, his gaze running over her entire face. Hitomi stopped her gaze on his small but neat lips, closed in a thin line. Smoothly stood on her toes and covered him with cool lips, covering her deep red eyes. Grabbing his wife by the waist, he pulled her closer, enjoying the closeness of a woman's body, completely immersing himself in their unexpected kiss, in which they mixed feelings of weakness and strength. Each proved their point through this impulse, while savoring each other's lips, receiving bliss from each other. Chapter 12 White, like freshly fallen snow, the area opened up before his eyes as soon as he plunged into the kingdom of Morphus. In a couple of months, he had already gotten used to being here. But Madara could not understand what was wrong. Why was he still having this dream? How to decipher it, and understand why the young shinobi had been having this dream for a long time. But now something had changed. The atmosphere had become more oppressive, heavy, as if warning of something. Madara could not control his emotions. Anxiety had taken over his mind, and he began to look around the place in confusion, looking for the reason for the sensations he had caused.